Welcome to another FAR walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over FAR Area 1, this is Section E, and this is a remembering and understanding topic. Recall appropriate financial statement titles to be used for the financial statements prepared under a special purpose framework. So we're talking about special purpose frameworks here, and we're going to be doing that the Superfast CPA way, which is diving straight into questions. That's one of our main strategies. If you don't know much about our strategies, we talk about going straight into the questions to learn the material instead of watching lectures or reading textbooks. Why not do what you're going to be doing on test day, which is multiple choice questions and sims? Use that to learn the material. We talk about the key strategies to passing the CPA exam in our free 1-hour webinar training on SuperfastCPA.com. So if you want to learn more, make sure you go check that out. The link will be in the description, and it looks like this. Also, just letting you know, we will only be going over 5 questions today, and normally there's also a member version on the Superfast CPA forum where people can get additional questions, usually like a 10-question video, to get extra practice. Now, today that is not the case. This is one of the few videos where this is a topic that's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. There's not that much to it as far as the FAR exam goes, so we're only going to be doing 5 questions today. There's no member version of this, but most of the time there is a member version where you get additional questions to practice and learn a little bit more. So if you like this and you like our other videos, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and check out, again, that free 1-hour webinar training. Let's go ahead and go to the questions now. All right, here we are at question 1. Which of the following best describes a special purpose framework in accounting, and whether financial statement titles can be the same as those used under GAAP? Okay, so if you don't really know what this even means or what the rules are, that's okay. We're going to read through these different possible explanations, and then we're going to look at the answer to kind of get an understanding of what we're learning in this video. All right, so A, a special purpose framework is a financial reporting framework required for publicly traded companies, and the financial statement titles must be different from GAAP titles. Okay. B, a special purpose framework is a financial reporting framework other than GAAP, and the financial statement titles must not be the same as those used under GAAP. C, a special purpose framework is a modified version of GAAP for private companies, and the financial statement titles must follow GAAP conventions. And D, a special purpose framework is a simplified version of GAAP used by small businesses, and the financial statement titles can never be the same as those used under GAAP. Okay, so a few different options here. Is it just a specific framework for publicly traded companies? Is it something other than GAAP? Is it a modified version of GAAP? Is it a simplified version of GAAP? If you don't know, that's okay. We're going to dive straight into the answer to learn what special purpose frameworks are and what the rules are for their titles for their financial statements. All right, here we are at the answer. The answer is B. A special purpose framework is a financial reporting framework other than GAAP, and the financial statement titles must not be the same as those used under GAAP. Okay, let's dive into this. A special purpose framework, also known as other comprehensive bases of accounting or basis of accounting, and this is otherwise known as OCBOA. This is probably something you've heard in your college classes, OCBOA. Basically, these are other frameworks, special purpose frameworks, or other comprehensive bases of accounting that are different from GAAP. Again, they are a financial reporting framework used by entities that do not follow GAAP. These frameworks include cash basis, modified cash basis, tax basis. Those are the 3 most common, by the way, and others tailored to specific needs like regulatory or contractual reporting. Since the accounting principles differ from GAAP, the titles of financial statements cannot be the same as those used under GAAP. So that's something that you need to pay attention to. When it comes to these special purpose frameworks, they cannot use the same financial statement titles as GAAP financial statements. So what does that mean? For example, instead of using titles like balance sheet or income statement, financial statements under a special purpose framework will have titles such as statement of assets and liabilities under cash basis, or statement of revenues and expenses under tax basis, to reflect this specific accounting basis. This ensures clarity and avoids misleading users about the nature of the financial statements. So that's like the big idea behind this topic on the CPA exam, is they don't want you to get confused if you see something like statement of assets and liabilities thinking that that is a GAAP title, or vice versa when you're talking about a cash basis financial statement and you see the balance sheet. That's actually not correct. These special purpose frameworks cannot use the same titles for their financial statements as GAAP financial statements because We don't want any confusion to be there. So that's kind of the idea behind this video. Let's dive into the next few questions to learn a little bit more. All right, here we are at question 2. Which of the following would not be a title appropriate to be used for a financial statement prepared on the cash basis of accounting? So something that would be easy to do for these next questions, think about the normal financial statement titles you use for normal accounting, like balance sheet, income statement, and the other things that are associated with that. And if you see any of those for these next questions, just remember that that's not going to be a part of a special purpose framework financial statement. So with that, would it be statement of cash receipts and disbursements, statement of assets and equity, statement of revenues collected and expenses paid? But by reading those first 3, those do not sound like the things we've covered in the previous videos where we've been going over FAR. They don't sound at all like the typical financial statements. Statement of financial position, we have talked about that one. That might not be the same as the balance sheet or the income statement, but we have talked about that in previous videos if you've watched them. So I pretty much have given it away by just walking through this. Statement of financial position is not going to be appropriate for preparing cash basis accounting. So let's walk through this and kind of talk this over. So the answer is, like I said, the statement of financial position. Let's talk about the explanation. When financial statements are prepared on the cash basis of accounting, the titles reflect the cash nature of the framework. Common titles could include statement of cash receipts and disbursements, and that would be reporting cash inflows and outflows. Statement of assets and equity, that would be showing cash-based assets and equity, kind of similar to a balance sheet. This first one was probably kind of similar to a cash flow statement. Statement of revenues collected and expenses paid, which shows revenues and expenses based on when cash received or paid. That would be kind of like an income statement. But again, very different titles because this is a different framework. It's not in GAAP. The statement of financial position, however, is used under GAAP for accrual-based financial statements for non-profit entities and is not appropriate for cash basis accounting. Cash basis statements must reflect the framework's cash-based nature, distinguishing them from GAAP titles. So we've talked about the statement of financial position when we were talking about non-profit entities, and that is a GAAP function. And so you don't want to mix up statement of financial position thinking, oh, that's not the balance sheet, that's not the income statement, so that's probably something that would be under a special purpose framework. It is kind of specific, like for not-for-profit entities, but it is still considered under GAAP, whereas cash basis of accounting is not a GAAP accounting mechanism, so you would have different titles. So we've kind of gone over that for cash basis of accounting. Let's go to the next question to learn a little bit more. All right, here we are at question 3. Which of the following is a financial statement title that could be used for financial statements prepared on the modified cash basis of accounting? Okay, so let's walk through these. Statement of comprehensive income, statement of other comprehensive income, statement of assets, liabilities, and equity, statement of operations. Now, which of these sounds familiar, something you've kind of probably seen in your typical day-to-day accounting, and which one is something that's doesn't sound like that? Honestly, I feel like this is a pretty straightforward topic, so I think you could pause the video if you need to, or you already have an idea, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at it together to see if you already have an idea of what would be under a special purpose framework. So with that, let's look at the answer. All right, the answer is C, statement of assets, liabilities, and equity. Again, probably pretty easy to pick that out once you kind of understand what we're going through in this video. Modified cash basis of accounting incorporates aspects of both cash and accrual accounting, requiring distinct financial statement titles. So it's still not inside GAAP. If they modified it too much, it might just be straight up accrual accounting, so they have to kind of be careful. But modified cash basis, it's a mixture between cash and accrual, and they would most likely have something like statement of assets, liabilities, and equity, and that would report, of course, their cash transactions and accrual items such as the fixed assets or the long-term liabilities, basically the balance sheet, and then statement of revenues collected, expenses paid, and retained earnings. That would probably be like the income statement. Other titles like the statement of comprehensive income, statement of other comprehensive income. If you remember, that is something that you've definitely seen in normal GAAP accounting. This is a normal financial statement. It's not a special purpose framework statement. So these would be under GAAP. They're not going to be used for the modified cash basis financial statement titles. So that's kind of an idea of what the modified cash basis of accounting titles would look like. Let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 4. Which of the following is not considered a special purpose framework in accounting? Now, we've pretty much already talked about all of this. You pretty easily should be able to pick out which one is not, because we've talked about it a lot. If you need to, think about it, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at it together. All right, here we are. The answer is, of course, D, accrual basis. That's basically what we've been talking about this whole time, that is GAAP. and everything else that is not accrual basis could be or is a special purpose framework. So let's read through this. A special purpose framework refers to a financial reporting framework other than GAAP used for specific reporting needs. That would include tax basis, which is for specifically tax reporting rules, cash basis, which is basically just focusing on cash. There's no accruals, there's no receivables, and then there's regulatory basis. We didn't talk about this too much because it's not very common and not something that you're really going to hear about too much on the exam, but this is a different type of special purpose framework that has specific regulatory guidelines that they have to report on, and this is, again, a special purpose framework. Accrual basis is basically the fundamental component of GAAP. It's not a special purpose framework. It, of course, recognizes revenues when earned and expenses when incurred, making it a standard accounting basis rather than a special purpose one. Really straightforward. Accrual basis is the typical GAAP accounting basis. And when you hear cash basis, modified cash basis, maybe even tax basis or regulatory basis or contractual basis, those are all special purpose frameworks that are not GAAP, and so they have to have different titles. Let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. Which of the following would most likely be a financial statement title used for OCBOA financial statements? Remember, OCBOA is basically just another way of saying special purpose framework. So which one of these would be one that would probably be used? Again, this is not too difficult of a topic. You probably already know the answer. If you need to, pause the video, think about this. If not, let's go ahead and look at the answer together. All right, here we are at question. All right, here we are. The answer is B, statement of revenues and expenses. Again, pretty easy once you kind of understand the topic and the purpose of this video. OCBOA, other comprehensive bases of accounting, refers to financial reporting frameworks outside of GAAP, such as the tax basis, cash basis, modified cash basis. Again, those are the most common ones. Financial statement titles under OCBOA typically reflect the framework used, like statement of revenues and expenses, tax basis, and a lot of times it will say this is under tax basis, for tax basis accounting. Titles such as income statement, statement of cash flows, and statement of financial position are specific to GAAP, while OCBOA uses titles that align with non-GAAP reporting standards. Again, like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't think this topic is extremely difficult. As far as the blueprints are concerned, they just want to make sure that you know that the titles for special purpose frameworks for their financial statements are going to be different than the financial statement titles for GAAP normal accounting. Before we go any further, let's do one more part of the SuperFast CPA process to kind of wrap this up, called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics, if you haven't heard it before, is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You'll notice that they keep saying OCBOA, so you want to know what that is. You'll notice that they keep mentioning cash basis or tax basis, and you know that those are some of the more tested special purpose frameworks, and different things like that. These are the things that you notice. You write them down as pillar topics or key points so that you kind of have it in your brain and you have it written down in your own words so that you know it for later. Let's go to the pillar topics for this video. All right, here we are at the pillar topics. Again, this is kind of a summary of what we learned from these questions. Special purpose frameworks, or OCBOA, include cash basis, modified cash basis, tax basis, and regulatory basis, and it could also include contractual basis. But again, regulatory basis, contractual basis, those are not as common, which are used by entities not required to follow GAAP. So these are all not GAAP. OCBOA versus GAAP. OCBOA frameworks use distinct titles and accounting methods that are not interchangeable with GAAP, ensuring clarity for users of financial statements prepared under special purpose frameworks. So again, they can't use the same titles because then it might be confusing if, an OCBOA financial statement, like for cash basis, had an income statement, and then people think that they're just using a normal GAAP accounting basis when in reality they're using cash basis. People need to know that. So that's why they have this rule. Examples of the OCBOA financial statement titles: you may not have to know these super deeply, but it's good to kind of have an idea of what they look like. Cash basis, it could be something like statement of cash receipts and disbursements and statement of assets and equity. Modified cash basis, statement of assets, liabilities, and equity, and statement of revenues collected and expenses paid. Again, they're pretty much giving you the same idea, just they have to say it differently. And finally, tax basis, statement of revenues and expenses, and statement of assets, liabilities, and equity. A lot of times they'll be kind of similar between the different special purpose frameworks, but they can't use the same titles as normal GAAP accounting financial statements. And with that, that is the end of the video. We've gone over 5 questions. We went over the pillar topics. Again, not too difficult of a topic. as far as the blueprint goes. Now, if you liked this, remember that most of our videos have a member version where we have an additional 5 or 6 questions where you can get extra practice. So if you like this, make sure you go check out our free 1-hour webinar training on SuperfastCPA.com. See if you like our strategies. And if you become a pro member of SuperfastCPA, you can get access to the member versions of these videos and get more practice, get more questions, and get more help with passing the CPA exams. If you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.